Here we go. Everyone's getting connected. So everyone is muted except Dr. Salam, Dr. Ray, and George. Got a lot of great people coming on. We're having a lot on Facebook, and I think we're just going to be about ready to get started. Dr. Ray, maybe we just give it one more minute as people start joining in and getting set up. I recognize a lot of good faces. I'm sure Dr. Ray does too. All right, Dr. Ray, I think we're all set. We're live, we're recording, and everyone is joined on, and we have several hundred here and watching us on Facebook Live. So I'll let you start welcoming everyone.
Greetings, everyone. This is Dr. Ray Lindley. I'm the Executive Director of Array Global Educational Services. Obviously, one of our main responsibilities in our organization is accreditation of schools. We feature accreditation in several countries, and we're pleased that we have had several already seek accreditation through us. And although this workshop is provided free of charge to all of the participants, we're thrilled to do that. On the other hand, if you would be so kind as to check out our website, which is arrayglobal.org, and you can find out more about us, the services we offer, and what we are aiming to do at Array Global Educational Services. I'm the Executive Director, and Dr. Jake Frankham is also with us today and will be participating here in just a moment. He's the Associate Director. And also presenting the workshop today is Dr. Salam Noor, and I'll introduce him in just a little bit, and George Maklavadze, who is a member of our administration. And so just to let you know, so that we see the breadth of what we're doing, Dr. Jake is in Idaho. I'm Mile High City of Denver, Colorado. George is in Switzerland, and Dr. Salam Noor is in his office in Oregon. So just from these four aspects, but we are also pleased that we have registered for this workshop representatives from Pakistan, Nigeria, Malaysia, Kyrgyzstan, Lebanon, India, Mexico, Saudi, Egypt, Oman, Nigeria, Iraq, Bahrain, Canada, Cyprus, Ecuador, UAE, United States of America, Palestine, Philippines, Romania, Russia, Syria, Thailand, and Turkey. And those are the ones we could jot down. We might have others, and we're so pleased to be offering these workshops. When Dr. Jake and I were trying to figure out how we could best help schools, we know that we're all in a very, very difficult situation right now. And so what we are trying to do is focus these workshops on, in light of COVID-19, which affects all of us, what are some practical ideas we can give to schools, to school leaders, to school teachers that will help you work through this whole issue of how we deal with things in a little bit different way. We have about almost 2,000 people of you who will be joining us today, and we're thrilled that we can have that kind of influence. We're offering these ideas to you, and so I would like to suggest, if you have not yet done it, please go on our Facebook page and review the workshop from July 25th, Saturday to July 25th. On that workshop, the whole intent was to give you ideas about how you schedule a day, how you schedule if you can have students part-time, full-time, how you do the online, and it was a wonderful workshop. It's on our Facebook page, so I would like to encourage you, if you didn't see that, there are some outstanding ideas on that workshop from Jessica Leneve and Jima Liberty, who were the experts on that particular day. And we have lined up all of the workshops from the 8th today, the 15th next Saturday, which will be totally on what we do with the curriculum when we have to make all these adjustments. And 2 weeks from today, on the 22nd, the workshop will be on how to use technology appropriately. If you are experiencing some of the same things that the participants did 2 weeks ago, there's a lot of frustration from parents, from students about how to use technology, and I don't know how to do this. And yet that's a world that we live in today. So 2 weeks from today, the workshop will be on technology. And 3 weeks from today, the last Saturday in August, the workshop will be dedicated to how do you keep the culture of the school strong during these very difficult times. And we do hope that these are helpful to you, and please feel free, if you have any questions that come up today, just write them in the chat box. If we have time, Dr. Noor will try to answer those at the end. If we have time, we're going to try to limit this to 1 hour today. And if not, we will respond to you if you just put your questions in there. So I'm glad that George is with us also, and next week he will be speaking briefly as part of the curriculum about 2 programs that we're very proud to be partnered with, and that's the Academic Olympiads and the LMS that has been developed by Fede, his company, and we'll be talking more about that next week. So I'd first like to introduce Dr. Jacob Frankum. He's responsible for putting all of these details together to get us going. And Dr. Jake, bring greetings and let's go.
All right, thank you, Dr. Ray. Thank you for that warm welcome, and welcome everyone. We have such a great variety from all over the world, and it's great to see. It's great to be part of that. We're excited to be here and help you and support you. Just a couple kind of housekeeping things. In the chat box, there's some comments about not being able to hear. And there were some good solutions for some people on there. Make sure you can log out and log back in, but you need to select computer audio. You can also go down into the bottom left-hand corner where it says mute, click on the caret right next to the arrow, right next to the mute button, and change the speaker that you want to utilize. So like Dr. Ray said, I want to do a quick overview of who we are and what we are. And you can see from our website a lot of what we're offering to schools. And we really, really want to focus on building relationships with schools and providing the services that are going to best support schools, not just during this COVID system, this COVID pandemic and problem, but at any time. And school at any level that they're working on. So like Dr. Ray said, we do accreditation services. We accredit K-12, international, national. We do post-secondary and vocational and distance-based institutions. Check that out. We have some amazing standards. The process is clear and it's clean, it's understandable, and it's directed specifically for foreigners, for international schools and international programs. We also certify schools. So if you're interested in becoming a STEAM or STEM school, we can work with you on that. We provide an array of consulting services. And let me show you some of the consultants that we do have, because I know we have a few of them on our video today. We have people from Saudi Arabia, people from Egypt. Obviously, we have a lot from the United States, people who are curriculum specialists, technology specialists, facility specialists. We're really excited about that. Administrator specialists. We have American working in Iraq. I know he's on the call today too. We have some technology specialists. And Jessica and Gemma presented to us, like Dr. Ray said, 2 weeks ago. And some of you mentioned that you'd like to see that. That is posted on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, and I'll put that in the comments too. You see Dr. Salam Noor, he's going to be presenting to us a little bit later on. Dr. Lori Sanchez and Robert Sanchez are going to present to us next week. So we're really, really excited about that. So look at some of the services that we have, our professional development, our Professional Educators Association, our awards and recognition. If you want to be a School of the Month, please check that out. If you have a Student of the Month, a student that you want to recognize, we do Student of the Month. And we have some other awards there too. We're excited to offer a distance-based education program that Mr. George is going to talk about a little bit more in detail next week. We offer an external assessment program, a suite for schools that we're really excited about, that are affordable but give some quality data as we look at school improvement. And then lastly, we have academic Olympiads, which is such a great way to compare students in their progress and just form relationships from all over the world. So I encourage you to look at that too, because it's a great program that we're starting in October. And so I think with that, Dr. Ray, I think that is all I have to go over, and I just want to welcome everyone, and I'm pleased to see everyone who is here. And again, if you do have any questions after this, we'd be happy to help.
Thank you, Dr. Jake. And before I introduce Dr. Salam, there's one more thing I would like to tell you about. On March 3 through 5 of 2021, we are going to be holding our first international conference. It will be March, as I said, March 3 through 5. And the nice part about it is George, who you see here, is going to host us in Lausanne, Switzerland. And if you've not been in Switzerland, or specifically in Lausanne, which is in a beautiful, beautiful location. And we will be sending out registration information for people. We're trying to keep the cost of the workshop low, but there will be professional workshops. There will be some time for seeing the beautiful scenery of Switzerland. And so if you're interested, mark that down on your calendars, because we will be getting the registration information out soon. The main reason we're here today is to deal with the second topic that we have chosen that we believe is extremely important during these very difficult times. It's important anytime, but especially during these difficult times, it's really important that we understand the whole system of how we work. Yes, we can talk about curriculum, we can talk about assessment, we can talk about teacher training, but everything needs to be worked into a system. And Dr. Salam Noor, who has worked with us for many years and has a vast experience in several areas of education. If you'd like to know more about him, you can go back to the webpage that we just were, and you can read just a short bio of what he has done in his professional career. But I not only am happy to introduce him as a professional educator and par excellence, but as a good friend. And I know that the schools where he has worked have found him to be very, very congenial and helpful, and brings a lot of good things to the table. So Dr. Salam, it's good to have you with us, and the show is yours. We're going to try to keep this whole program to less than an hour, or about an hour. So Dr. Jake and I will probably be asking some questions as we see things happen today. So Dr. Salam, good to have you. The show is yours.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome, and thank you first of all to Dr. Ray and Dr. Jake for providing us this opportunity to meet, although virtually, and to learn about some of the challenges that we have as educators and practitioners, no matter where we are, whether it's here in the United States or in your school and your community. And I would be remiss if I didn't say thank you. I always want to thank educators for the work that you do, because your work requires dedication, it requires commitment, and you're always facing all types of challenges, but this one is unique. And what's unique about this one also is that we're all facing it together at the same time. And I believe we will get through it together. And when we think about systems, I really want you to picture this. I want you to think about where we are today. I want you to think about where we were 6 months ago. Just pause for a second and think about what life was like, what your school was like 6 months ago. Just gonna give you 10 seconds. Just think about what was it like 6 months ago. Okay. And I think about the schools that I work with and the districts here in Oregon and elsewhere. I know that things were just wonderful and harmonious, and education was the way we expect it to be. And now if I were to ask you to think about what you want it to look like 6 months from now. So this conference in Switzerland, I hope it is in person, because I would love to go to Switzerland and get an opportunity to meet people face to face and connect with them at a very personal level. So I imagine that 6 months from now, you want your school to look like the way it did 6 months ago, right? So at the essence of all of that is this notion of a system. So 6 months ago, you had a system, and that system was very predictable. You had a way of organizing the school. You had a way of organizing the schedule of instruction and the mode of delivery. You knew when you were going to administer assessments, whether formative or end of course exams, etc. You knew when kids were going to show up, and you knew when they were going to get picked up to go home in the afternoon. And you had a planned course of instruction for that day, for the week, for the month, in fact, for the year. You knew what your facilities needed to look like. You had a consistent schedule of interactions with your colleagues, with each other, relative to curriculum, instruction, procedures, staff meetings, professional development, etc. So all of those things are part of a system. And I think what's really important is just to acknowledge that what we have now is a temporary situation, and one that we're going to overcome. And at some point, hopefully sooner than later, we will want to go back to that system of operating, a system of organizing instruction, organizing learning, delivering learning, assessing learning. And I think it's important for us to also think about what we've learned as a result of this process, because there may be some things that we can incorporate into that system moving forward. So I think as I work with schools here in Oregon, I keep reminding them to think about how do we want to come out of this. And when I think about international schools and international education specifically, I think about the type of experiences that students and families expect from you. I think they come to you for a particular reason and for a particular set of experiences that they can't get elsewhere. I would encourage you to think about that. And when I think about the system that you use to provide that experience, it consists of quality instruction, safe and positive learning environments, and that includes facilities and structures. It includes challenging curriculum and learning experiences for students. It includes enhanced experiences. Many of the international schools that I had the pleasure of visiting with Dr. Ray and Dr. Jake specifically have incorporated STEM type experiences, have incorporated community-based experiences or career-related learning experiences in addition to the academic curriculum. And I think in international schools specifically, parents play a more active role in their children's education. And I think you would concur that there is a greater deal of interaction between you and parents on a daily basis, whether it's via texting or formalized forms of communication. So parents and families expect that from you. So those things really comprise your system. It's the people, it's the instruction, it's the relationship, it's the unique experiences that you provide students. And the key here is, how do you preserve that in an altered or modified environment until you go back to normal, so to speak? So when we think about systems, and I'm really thrilled that we're doing this as a conversation, and Dr. Jake and Dr. Ray and Mr. George are going to weigh in, and we've captured your questions, and we're going to attempt to answer those questions. But I think what's important in this system is truly the people, because without people, we don't have the quality instruction. And you have to think about, how do we continue to build our own capacity even in this tight and challenging environment. So I would say if you did professional development on a regular basis prior to COVID-19 and prior to the closure of your schools, figure out how you continue that professional development. You're all on Zoom today. Technology has provided us an avenue to continue that professional development, even in a modified, perhaps focused way. And I would suggest not necessarily introducing new content, but utilize that professional development for people to connect, for people to understand what everybody is going through, to learn from one another how you maintain instruction in this environment, understand what people need, and really collaborate and support each other to provide the services that you intend to for the student. When I think about the instruction, for example, in your system, you all, based on the schools that I've visited and the educators that I've had the opportunity to interact with through accreditation visits, many of you are developing standards-based instruction. I think that's one of the accreditation standards that you have to meet, is that you have to identify standards and align your curriculum to those standards. So your system is based on standards-based instruction. But under this modified environment, you don't compromise that. You maintain your standards, but you adapt and you adjust. So instead of focusing on the full depth and breadth of standards and instructional proficiencies that you expect students to know, maybe we modify, but we maintain the standards-based experience. Your system is also really contingent on what's often referred to as the instructional core. And the instructional core is the relationship between the teacher, the student, and the content. So how do you preserve that in a modified environment? And you preserve it by continuing to build that relationship with the student, because in this different environment, you have to assess differently whether the student is actually learning, whether the student is comprehending and mastering the content that you want them to learn. So whether it's through distance learning, remote learning, I don't know exactly how you're engaging with your students, but I would suggest that that face-to-face and personal engagement could be the gauge to determine what students are learning, how much they're learning. And under this system, because I also believe parents and families send their kids to your schools because of that social emotional component that the public school setting perhaps does not offer. And that social emotional component is integral to this instructional core that describes the relationship between the student, the teacher, and the content. So I think under this system, we have an opportunity to even amplify the relationships that we have with parents and families. And I would even say use it to build stronger relationships and a different and a better way to engage parents in their children's education. So the engagement is not just with the student, the engagement is with the parent, because the parent essentially becomes a provider, becomes a teacher, an instructor, a supporter of their student. I think mainly when I think about systems, and we can delve into more specifics relative to how do you modify your instruction, how do you modify your curriculum, how do you use the opportunities as you engage with students to determine what they're learning, how they're learning, how much they're learning. I also think in this new environment that you're in, I would actually shift your focus to inquiry-based rather than the delivery. So quite often as educators, we want to provide information. I would suggest in this new environment that you're actually asking a lot of questions. And you start with those social emotional questions to the students. How are you today? What did you do today? What are you working on? What's new? What's bothering you? If, not to turn you all into counselors, so to speak, but I think through that experience, you can begin to discern how much is the student engaged, what are some of the challenges they're facing. I think that can give you really good feedback relative to the instruction that you're providing and the amount of curriculum that you're providing. I think adapting your curriculum and maybe shrinking it a little bit with a focus on what we often call power standards is an opportunity that you have here. So what are the key proficiencies that you want students to learn? And let's focus on those and let's help the student learn that. So the one thing I want to finish with, and then we'll open it up for questions and we'll delve into more details to the various aspects of this, is coherence. Systems are systems when there is a great deal of coherence and coordination and collaboration among component parts. And the component parts in a school setting are the people, both the leaders and the rest of the staff. They are the structures that you typically follow. They are your procedures, your norms. We have weekly staff meetings. We have monthly all staff meetings. We have weekly communications with parents. We have weekly professional development. I'm just using those as examples. Your facilities are equally important here. I think when parents come back to school in February, March, if you go back to in-person learning at that time, they're going to expect your facilities to be of the same quality and standard that they were before all of this happened. Your business procedures and norms have to be maintained. So people come to you, I believe, in international schools because they expect a level of service, but they expect a level of standardized procedures, structures, behaviors, and delivery. And I think it's really important to maintain that while you're trying, and quite frankly, it is a struggle to connect with students and their families in this environment, but I think it's absolutely imperative that you attend to all aspects of the system. And for you, the practitioners, I think maintaining some form and degree of normality is really important. So your regular weekly meetings as a staff in a professional learning community or as a school-wide staff become really critical here, because that's the opportunity for people to connect and care. And we use this term here in our state, it's called connect and care. And we use it specifically with students, just to connect with them. And in some instances, when we sense that the student is actually struggling through, whether it's Zoom or some other medium that we're connecting with, we actually have done home visits, believe it or not. We've had teachers that actually went to students' homes. They did not enter the home and they interacted with them from the outside, but they realized that the student was really distressed and the student needed that personal attention. We've had teachers that log in a couple of times a week and have lunch with students via Zoom. So there are lots of ways you could maintain that connection with your students and your families. But coherence is critical. And coherence means systems, component parts working in unison and supporting each other to preserve the integrity of the system. Because when this is all said and done, you're going to go back to working and operating within that system. And that's what parents are actually expecting by bringing their kids to your schools. So Dr. Ray, Dr. Jake, I think I'm going to stop here and we can start looking at questions if you would like.
Sure. Let me start off, Salam. We use the word stakeholders when we're talking about the system. And so let's identify who the stakeholders are. Of course, we have the professional staff. We have the total staff that includes every person who works or has something to do with the running of the school. Of course, we have the students. We have the parents. And one that sometimes we might not always remember is the community in which we exist. I know as a high school principal, I always had to worry about our kids leaving the campus and going throughout the neighborhood. And sometimes the neighbors would complain. They'd say, these kids are on my lawn or whatever. But those are the key areas of stakeholders. How do you see, Salam, that we can have these stakeholders all be communicative with each other so that it works the system well? Because as we all know, if you don't pay attention to one of these groups, you're going to have some problems. So how do we systematically work these all together? Maybe more so now because we don't have that face-to-face, person-to-person contact that we've had.
Yes, thank you for the question, Dr. Ray. I think communication is really the key here. And I think you have to be a lot more nimble in terms of the communication you provide and the types and formats of communication. So if you provided in-person, face-to-face communication in the past, and that's not an option now, then we could do small group communications. We've actually utilized Zoom to do what's often called community cafes. I don't know if you're familiar with that concept or not, but a community cafe essentially is what we're doing right now. The only difference is that it's organized around a set of questions that are designed to understand people's needs. So the stakeholders, for example, could be a situation where you do a community cafe with teachers. You could do a community cafe with students. You could do a community cafe with the community that you are a part of and that you serve, and maybe a community cafe with multiple stakeholders together. I think what's really clear, what's really critical about this communication is clarity. So what is it that you want to communicate? Why are you convening these groups? Are you trying to provide them information about how your school is operating under COVID-19? Are you asking for help regarding some certain things that you need? But I think absent in-person communication, we can use technology to do that as an in-person, if you will. But you could use email, you could use newsletters, a variety of forms of communication to just let your broader community know what's going on. And most importantly, I would highly recommend that your communication be about the positive things that are happening in the school. Yes, talk about the challenges, but what are you doing to solve these problems? How are you providing instruction, the quality instruction to the students? How are students faring under these experiences? And if there is a way for them to help, ask for help. It's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So Dr. Ray, does that get at it a little bit?
Yes, I think so. I think what I hear you saying, and it's definitely something with which I agree, is that we have to find ways of communicating with all of these stakeholders, and it might be totally different. You mentioned the cafe, and you mentioned the things such as online and so forth. I'm only going to throw out a thought here, but I want to challenge us to think, is this type of communication more important now than it was before we were faced with this situation? Of course, you know, by the way I asked the question, yes, it's extremely, and we have to find ways to keep our system going in ways of communication that keeps everybody informed of what's going on.
Absolutely. And the only thing I would add, Dr. Ray, is that don't assume people know what's going on. Don't assume that people understand the world that you're operating in. And don't be afraid to share that these are some of the challenges. This is what students have told us. This is how we're addressing social emotional learning. This is how we're providing instruction relative to core content in math and science and reading, etc. And keep in mind that some of these individuals that you're communicating with are also your kids' parents and perhaps extended family members.
Hey, Dr. Salam, I have a question. I really like your thoughts about school culture. And I think I shared this 2 weeks ago when we had a workshop that in my schools, we did a scavenger hunt because we know that some of these culture and these activities are so important. So we did a scavenger hunt where high school kids could drive around in their cars, elementary kids, their parents could drive them around. But it was so important to have this kind of positive activity, especially during this COVID crisis. So many people are dealing with social and emotional issues. And so I really like those thoughts, and especially the cafes and keeping in communication. I know we have a lot of teachers in attendance today. So Dr. Salam, do you have any advice of how teachers can keep their classroom system in process and their processes in place during this pandemic and keep that culture maybe still alive, that relationship, because relationships are so important at what we do?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Jake, for the question. And I think that is really, really one of the key elements of the system that we need to preserve, and that is the learning culture. So in your schools, students get accustomed to a certain mode of engagement with you, engagement with rigorous, challenging, demanding content, engagement in an environment that involves other students perhaps as part of the learning process, learning experience. Um, so I think maintaining that culture is important, but the question is, so how do you develop that on an online learning environment? And I would suggest that it's really not different from what you do in your actual physical classroom. I think it puts more burden on you, quite frankly, to engage the students. So if you're doing a Zoom classroom like we are now, I would start by asking questions. So I think you have to shift to asking specific focused questions relative to all of the students. And based on your interactions with certain individual students that you know need more help, you can actually maybe focus on them and ask them specific questions. I think when I talk about a learning environment or a learning culture, it's not just a student-teacher relationship. Is there an opportunity to leverage students helping other students in this environment? And sometimes you may do that in your classroom. I've been in situations where we've had student mentors, student tutors. Is this something that you can cultivate online? Because it's based on relationships, peer-to-peer relationships, peer-to-peer mentoring. I would suggest that you also leverage the relationships that you are having with parents. You might have heard this notion that's emerging now. I think it's actually emerging all over the world, not just here in the United States, of micro school or micro classrooms, where parents are coming together and they're actually helping small groups of students relative to what they're learning in school. So you could leverage some of the relationships that you have with key parents where they become tutors or mentors for a small group of students. But I think the main thing is maintaining that learning culture absent the normal or traditional ways of motivating students. Quite often, we motivate students through grading, through exams, through expectations, through homework. Now they're in a completely different environment that you really don't have full control over. So as teachers, how do we create motivation without grades? How do we create motivation without assessment? I think making learning fun, like Dr. Jake mentioned, the scavenger hunt, making learning relevant to where they are. So you could do a scavenger hunt based on what they have in their homes. If it's a group of students that live in the same neighborhood, you could do the same thing with that group of students. You could do, I've seen a lot of teachers shift to journaling. So a writing assignment, maybe you ask students to write and describe what they do on a daily basis. Maybe you ask them to describe how their family is spending their time without being too intrusive, if you will, or invasive to their privacy. But I think I think it's really important now to shift the focus to the environment that the student is in. What are they doing in that environment? What kinds of experiences can we draw on as learning experiences and as teaching opportunities for you? How do you motivate them to stay engaged and connected? And I want to underscore the word connected here. Connected to you as a teacher and connected to other students. Because that's really the biggest fear that we have under this environment, is that students are isolated, disconnected, and there's social trauma that they're going to experience as a result of this. So how do we, if they're playing football in the field, just draw their personal interest. Draw what you know from what you know about these students. What is it that they all have in common? So if you're teaching a 5th grade or a 7th grade class, what do all of those students have in common? What are some shared experiences do they have that you can bring into your lessons and into your learning? The key here is to move away from the compliance nature of education, meaning you have to submit this amount of homework at this time or your grade is going to suffer. So for you teachers, you have to really be comfortable with this idea that we're going to focus on learning and experiences and connections rather than our traditional methods of grading and assessing student work. I think also we should find ways to empower the students and have the students tell us what they're interested in. Maybe based on their own experiences, their family experiences. So just be flexible in terms of what you're teaching, how you're teaching, be adaptable because we expect them to adapt to this new environment, but we, the adults, have to adapt to this new environment and to be really flexible and to be willing to forego that full lesson that we had planned for the day. And maybe you get to a portion of it. So what are the key focus learning experiences and components you want students to have, and that should be your focus?
An interesting thing that comes up in many situations is grading. Obviously, we all like, we might not like it, but we all need to be evaluated at some time. What are you thinking in this system where we're used to one kind of assessment? How do you feel this can be woven into this world of online learning that we live in?
Yeah, I think that is really an important question because it's a big part of the culture of our education system. That's how we know whether students have mastered the content. But I would challenge us as educators to become more formative in the way we assess student work. And in this particular context, think about its effects on you. I mean, quite frankly, we have to think about how this is affecting us as adults. How is it affecting our emotional state? It's a challenge for teachers to show up in this environment. So think about kids. The reason I use that as an example is because we need to adjust our conception of grading. So when you ask students to do work, of course you want to look at the completion of the work, the quality of the work, the accuracy of the work. But I think you also have to focus on the fact that they are actually doing the work. They're showing up, they're being attentive, they're attempting to do the work. And we need to think about what help do they need. You know, maybe you need to provide more assistance or different types of assistance. This is where you can leverage the family, quite frankly, not to make the parents or the family the monitors or the proctors of their exams or work, but how do we leverage the parents so they are helping the student with the traditional things that happen in our normal environment. Kid shows up on time, they're ready to learn, they've had breakfast, they're engaged, they're attentive. So I think part of this adjustment for us is creating a schedule that students follow. And maybe you reward them for being there at 7:15 and them demonstrating to you that they've attempted to do all of this work. You're not going to be able to do formalized assessments, if you will, or full grade level assessments because you need a different environment to have them in. But I think you can measure their attentiveness. You can measure as they submit your work to you, instead of just grading it, you know, you met it or you didn't meet it, use it as an opportunity to provide meaningful, constructive feedback. I think this is really the opportunity that we have is instead of just doing traditional grading, let's use this as a way to provide feedback, meaningful, relevant, constructive feedback to the student, because that could be your lesson, the beginning of your lesson plan the following day. Let's look at the work that you all did. Let's look at this homework. So I think you just have to create a different learning experience without compromising the standards and the proficiencies that you expect students to demonstrate. So grading is something that we really have to adjust our minds around and not be stuck on it. Don't be so stuck on grading. I've seen so many schools here shift to a pass, no pass, although most schools in the state are going to do grading and attendance and all of these things that we typically do as part of our normal routine. But we don't know how successful that's going to be, especially with, you know, first, second, and third, or even kindergartners. So.
I think that's great, Dr. Salam. I think you really gave us a lot of good advice right there, especially with that answer. And I know my question is about the relationships again. And you talked about this at the very beginning, how relationships are so important. We have a lot going on in the chat right now where people are saying, how do you build those relationships virtually? I know you talked about phone calls and maybe doing lunch together over Zoom or anything else. And we know that relationships are very difficult to do virtually, very, very difficult. We obviously prefer to have it face-to-face. Do you have anything else to add to these teachers that are and administrators that are adding these questions into the chat box?
Yeah, I think for administrators specifically, you have to model that, because you all work in a culture that thrives on that personal interaction, in a culture where community and family are an integral part of everything that we do. That's life in the communities and the countries and societies that you operate in. So I think for school leaders in particular, they have to model that for their staff. So they are the ones who have to convene the weekly staff meetings. They're the ones who have to still lead professional development with their staff, or the communication that they would typically engage in. Use technology, use Zoom, Teams, whatever modality that you have. I would say you have to continually and consistently do that, even when it's uncomfortable, not ideal, doesn't give you the same feeling or the effect that you want from it. Maintaining that is absolutely critical. So I would suggest that for school leaders. For teachers, I think it's important for you to not be experiencing this alone. So if no one is initiating, you initiate. You initiate your group meetings, whether it's a professional learning community or whatever format that you have in your school. Department meeting, team meeting, subject area meeting, you name it. So I think it's absolutely imperative that you make that extra effort to connect. And we call it, like I said earlier, connect and care, or care and connect. So if you care enough about the person that you work with, connect with them. And I purposefully started with the adults. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kids now and the families. But the adults are experiencing the same challenges that the kids are experiencing. We are connected in the environment that we operate in. So it's really imperative that we maintain those connections to the degree that we possibly can. And I would encourage you, those that are joining us today, to take the lead on that. Be the one that initiates a Zoom teacher meeting. And you know, it doesn't have to be focused on instruction. It could be a social connection to say, how are you doing? These are some of the challenges I'm facing with my kids and families. I need help with some instructional resources that somebody else has developed that you all can share. So it's really important to maintain those connections. Dr. Jake, the essence of our work really is about connecting with students first and foremost, and then connecting with their family. And this is equally important, and to maintain those connections with students, and for you as teachers to actually pursue and maintain those connections. But we have an opportunity now to actually connect with their parents too. And my hope is that as we come out of this predicament that we're in, that we find that parents are very willing to take an active role in their children's education. Parents are very willing to connect with us and become a partner with us in teaching their children and making sure that they're fully engaged and doing what they need to be successful. So I just think we have to force ourselves, quite frankly, and I'll speak from personal experience. I'm a very social person. I like to connect with people. I like to meet with them for coffee, for lunch. I like to bring people together for conversations and to do the work. And it's been really challenging. And at first, Zoom was really uncomfortable. But now I've become a Zoom master. I can actually facilitate meetings with a lot of people. We can do breakouts, and we're using it to have that connectivity and that personal touch that we all value. So push yourself, challenge yourself. It is really, really important, and your students want it and need it.
I'm kind of curious, and I've seen a couple of questions come over, and basically on how can we assess student work to really be realistic? And specifically, the question has come across, which I'm not surprised. Let's think about our little kiddies, the primary, the kindergarten, the grade 1, grade 2, and they're not even used to any kind of assessment. And I'm asking that question, what ideas do you have for these young ones who the whole idea of school is they come at it from a very social aspect. They're having fun. Suggestions on what we do with the young ones, the little kids.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think the younger kids pose more challenges for us because their attention span is much shorter than the older kids. And the focus is really on that personal, social, emotional learning and competency. So I would say for teachers, you have to understand that parents are just as stressed out about this as you are, because they want their children to learn all these proficiencies that will help them be successful, that are foundational, as we know, but will help them be successful at that next stage. So for kindergarten teachers in particular, I highly recommend that you identify specifically the proficiencies that you want and expect students to know by the end of the school year. I would map those out, and you probably have them mapped out, and you know that during the school year, you know where students need to be at various levels. So what I would suggest is that you enlist the parent as your co-teacher. And some parents are going to be willing to do it, and others perhaps not. But I think this communication that we talked about earlier becomes really, really critical. So communicating with parents relative why it's important for their kids that are in kindergarten in particular to be at this kind of continuum of development and skill attainment becomes absolutely imperative. And then enlist the parent, and you and the parent will have to work together to assess where the students are relative to these proficiencies. And in this particular context, because you're not having physical direct contact with the student, your parent is going to be the best measurement, if you will, the assessor. And not in a formalized way, but you can engage the parent relative to the letters and the sounds that the students have mastered, relative to the behavior that the student is demonstrating. So parents in this particular case need to become your partners, your co-teachers. And I am confident that many will support you in that regard because they care about their children as much as you do. And they want them to have that foundation that will help them be successful down the road.
That's
I
excellent.
just had a light bulb. I had a light bulb go off. Excuse me, Dr. Jake. I had a light bulb go off. You know, you probably have some parents or some people who are very proficient at this type of thing you just described. Make them in charge of your Zoom call or co in charge. And I think that what you just suggested there, and it is involving, it's the system. We have to involve everybody. And if you've got parents who are really doing a good job with involving their own children, perhaps they could go just as we're doing here. We're not magical saying, here's a solution to all of your COVID-19 education issues. We're throwing out ideas of things you could consider. So I believe that in every school, we probably have parents who could help you do that. Dr. Jake, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. That's okay. I know we're running low on time. And one question that really is putting things into perspective with me, you know, every time we go through some issue or some problem in life, we always come out a little bit stronger. And I just wonder what kind of things you think that we are learning from going through this pandemic together as a school, as a society. I know as an administrator, as a district superintendent, I'm learning a lot. My teachers are learning a lot. What do you see, Dr. Salam, that we are learning and growing from?
I think that is a really important question because we're all grappling with, you know, with the moment with now. What are we going to do now? What will we do in September when kids show up? How do we maintain our own capacity to provide instruction? And in some instances, some of you have kids in school at homes. You have school-age children at home that you're also providing instruction to. I think for me, as I reflect on our system here in the United States in particular, I think we have to learn to be really nimble and adaptable, because this is a challenge that no one has ever encountered before. So we're having to adjust our education system. We have to adjust the way we think about our students. We have to adjust the way we deliver instruction. But for me, these are really valuable lessons. And when schools come back into session, let's say in 21, not even this coming school year, I sure hope that we reflect on this experience and realize that we can have blended learning models. You know, for some students, especially those in high school in particular, this environment could be very suitable and very engaging for them. We don't know that for sure yet, but I think we can think about how do we use technology to continue to interface with parents in particular. How do we use technology to interface with the broader community? Could we use technology more effectively in terms of providing lesson plans, instructions, homework, you know, in advance? So I think there's some lessons that we can learn from this, but I think I want to bring it back to the systems piece. Having a sound, coherent, strong system to begin with is what allows us to survive these types of challenges. And I would say that COVID-19 is going to be one of the future challenges that we experience as a world. So I want to bring it back to this notion of system, and the system is the people that are in that system, the structures, the procedures, the culture, the expectations, the relationships. Maintaining those and continuing to strengthen them and build on them becomes really imperative for us to be able to get through these types of challenges. But technology, in my opinion, is the one thing that we really have to think about how we use in the future in a lot of different ways. Because look at us today, you know, we're in, how many countries did you say, Dr. Ray? We've got
26, if I'm counting correctly.
We have 26
countries. Include the U.S. because we've got several U.S. educators on here also.
Right. So you have so many countries, so many educators, and here we are learning together and sharing our experiences. So I think one takeaway at least is technology. How do we use technology in different ways, and how do we get comfortable using it in a variety of other ways than we have in the past?
Yeah, and we need to remind ourselves, as we talked a couple of weeks ago, this is a world these kids live in, the internet. They live in that world. And there are ways to find out what they're doing on the internet. We can adapt some of those practices into the educational system.
Yep.
Well, Dr. Ray, I just have one announcement as we're wrapping things up, because I know you probably want to give some kind of final statement. Please make sure that you go to the link that is posted in the chat to fill out so we can have a survey, and that we can also take attendance, because we have a lot of people that are attending at this time. So please make sure that you get on, you take this survey in the next hour. If you do have any problems, please send me an email, send us an email, and we can help you out. But just take a minute, fill that out. And that's what the certificates will be based upon if you attend these 4 different workshops. Again, we have a workshop today on the 15th, the 22nd, and 29th, all different topics, different presenters, and we're excited about having each and every one of you here.
Well, let me conclude by a statement that we all should be we should know very well. This isn't the educational world that we prepared for. This is simply something totally outside what we thought we would be doing as educators. That's really a tough situation, and yet we are the responsible adults who have to make the best out of what we have. And I think that as we're presenting these workshops, and as I said, next week we'll be talking about curriculum and adjustments and so forth in the curriculum itself as to how we can make it work. We have to understand that we are the ones who are responsible. I know that any of us could get way down and be very discouraged because, oh, this isn't good. This isn't how I thought it would be, and this isn't what I trained to be. You have precious, precious, precious lives in your influence who are depending on you as the adults and us as all adults to make the best we can out of what we have. And I would just throw this out to you. When it all seems too hard and you are crippled by fear, the best course of action is to simply persevere. I'll say it again. When it all seems too hard and you are crippled by fear, the best course of action is to simply persevere. Before we started today, I went to my bookcase, pulled out one of my favorite books. If you don't know this book by Dr. Seuss, Oh, the Places You'll Go. Can you see it here? A wonderful, wonderful book that applies also to adults, by the way. I've used this in adult instruction also. Don't let where you are stop where you can be. And the whole idea here is you can go, and the kids love this book. You want to get them emotionally involved, this is a good way to do it. Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. Children's book, but hey, we all can learn and benefit by these wonderful, wonderful children's stories. Oh, the Places You'll Go by Dr. Seuss. So thank you all for being with us today. We'll look forward to seeing you again next week at the same time when we'll be talking specifically about curriculum and how we adjust it or how we make it real. And I can tell you, as many of you, we know we do not have all the answers. We do not, you do not, nobody has all the answers. But what we're trying to do is share together any answers that we have and hopefully cause others to really respond and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that. And so this generates good thinking on the part of all of us. So bless you all for the wonderful job that you're doing. The fact that you're here tells us that you really do care about your students' education and you want to make it the best possible, even in light of the difficult circumstances in which we find ourselves. So thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Dr. Jake, for setting all this up. And he's the real guru of all this activity. And thank you so much and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Ray. Thanks, everyone.